Chapter 2. The baby, a boy, is born at 5 past 5 in the morning. He measures 20 inches long, weighs 7 pounds 9 ounces. Ashima's initial glimpse, before the cord is clipped and they carry him away, is of a creature coated with a thick white paste, and streaks of blood, her blood, on the shoulders, feet, and head. A needle placed in the small of her back was removed, all sensation from her waist to her knees, and given her a blistering headache in the final stages of the delivery. When it is all over she begins to shiver profoundly, as if beset with an acute fever. For half an hour she trembles, in a daze covered by a blanket, her insides empty, her outside still misshapen. She is unable to speak, to allow the nurses to help exchange her blood-soaked gown for a fresh one. In spite of endless glasses of water, her throat is parched. She is told to sit on a toilet, to squirt warm water from a bottle between her legs. Eventually she is sponged clean, put into a new gown, wheeled into yet another room. The lights are soothingly dim, and there is only one other bed next to hers, empty for the time being. When Ashok arrives, Patty is taking Ashima's blood pressure, and Ashima is reclining against a pile of pillows, the child wrapped like an oblong white parcel in her arms. Beside the bed is a bassinet, labelled with a card that says, "Baby boy Ganguly." "He's here," she says quietly, looking up at Ashok with a weak smile. Her skin is faintly yellow, the colour missing from her lips. She has circles beneath her eyes, and her hair, spilling from its braid, looks as though it has not been combed for days. Her voice is hoarse, as if she had caught a cold. He puts up a chair by the side of the bed, and Patty helps to transfer the child from mother's to father's arms. In the process, the child pierces the silence in the room with a short-lived cry. His parents react with mutual alarm, but Patty laughs approvingly. "You see," Patty says to Ashima, "he's already getting to know you." Ashok does as Patty tells him, stretching out his arms, putting one hand below the neck, another below the bottom. "Go on," Patty urges. "He wants to be held tightly. He's stronger than you think." Ashok lifts the minuscule parcel higher, closer to his chest. "Like this?" "There you go," Patty says. "I'll leave you three alone for a while." At first, Ashok is more perplexed than moved by the pointiness of the head, the puffiness of the lids, the small white spots on the cheeks, the fleshy upper lip that droops prominently over the lower one. The skin is paler than either Ashima's or his own, translucent enough to show slim green veins at the temples. The scalp is covered by a mass of wispy black hair. He attempts to count the eyelashes. He feels gently through the flannel for the hands and feet. "It's all there," Ashima says, watching her husband. "I already checked." What are the eyes like? Why won't he open them? Has he opened them? She nods. What can he see? Can he see us? I think so, but not very clearly, and not in full color, not yet. They sit in silence, the three of them, as still as stones. How are you feeling? Was it all right? He asks Ashima. But there is no answer, and when Ashok lifts his gaze from his son's face, he sees that she too is sleeping. When he looks back to the child, the eyes are open, staring up at him, unblinking, as dark as the hair on its head. The face is transformed. Ashok has never seen a more perfect thing. He imagines himself as a dark, grainy, blurry presence, as a father to his son. Again, he thinks of the night he was nearly killed, the memory of those hours that have forever marked him flickering and fading in his mind. Being rescued from that shattered train had been the first miracle of his life. But here, now, reposing in his arms, weighing next to nothing but changing everything, is the second. Apart from his father, the baby has three visitors, all Bengali: Maya and Dilip Nandi, a young married couple in Cambridge whom Ashima and Ashok met a few months ago in the Purity Supreme, and Dr. Gupta, a mathematics postdoc from Dehradun, a bachelor in his 50s, whom Ashok has befriended in the corridors of MIT. At feeding times, the gentlemen, including Ashok, step out into the hall. Maya and Dilip give the boy a rattle and a baby book, with places for his parents to commemorate every possible aspect of his infancy. There is even a circle in which to paste a few strands from his first haircut. Dr. Gupta gives the boy a handsome illustrated copy of Mother Goose rhymes. Lucky boy, Ashok remarks, turning the beautifully sewn pages. Only hours old and already the owner of books. What a difference, he thinks, from the childhood he has known. Ashima thinks the same, though for different reasons. For, as grateful as she feels for the company of the Nandis and Dr. Gupta, these acquaintances are only substitutes for the people who really ought to be surrounding them. Without a single grandparent or uncle or aunt at her side, the baby's birth, like most everything else in America, feels somehow haphazard, only half true. As she strokes and suckles and studies her son, she can't help but pity him. She has never known of a person entering the world so alone, so deprived. Because neither set of grandparents has a working telephone, their only link to home is by telegram, which Ashok has sent to both sides in Calcutta. With your blessings, boy and mother fine. As for a name, they have decided to let Ashima's grandmother, who is past 80 now, who has named each of her other six great-grandchildren in the world, do the honors. When her grandmother learned of Ashima's pregnancy, she was particularly thrilled at the prospect of naming the family's first Sahib. And so Ashima and Ashok have agreed to put off the decision of what to name the baby until a letter comes, ignoring the forms from the hospital about filling for a birth certificate. Ashima's grandmother has mailed the letter herself, walking with her cane to the post office, her first trip out of the house in a decade. The letter contains one name for a girl, one for a boy. Ashima's grandmother has revealed them to no one. Though the letter was sent a month ago, in July, it has yet to arrive. Ashima and Ashok are not terribly concerned. After all, they both know an infant doesn't really need a name. He needs to be fed and blessed, to be given some gold and silver, to be patted on the back after feedings, and held carefully behind the neck. Names can wait. In India, parents take their time. It wasn't unusual for years to pass before the right name, the best possible name, was determined. Ashima and Ashok can both cite examples of cousins who were not officially named until they were registered at 6 or 7 in school. The Nandis and Dr. Gupta understand perfectly. Of course you must wait, they agree. Wait for the name in his great-grandmother's letter. Besides, there are always pet names to tide one over. A practice of Bengali nomenclature grants to every single person two names. In Bengali, the word for pet name is "Daknam", meaning literally the name by which one is called by friends, family, and other intimates at home and in other private, unguarded moments. Pet names are a persistent remnant of childhood, a reminder that life is not always so serious, so formal, so complicated. They are a reminder, too, that one is not all things to all people. They all have pet names. Ashima's pet name is Monu, Ashok's is Mitu, and even as adults, these are the names by which they are known in their respective families, the names by which they are adored and scolded and missed and loved. Every pet name is paired with a good name, a bhalo naam, for identification in the outside world. Consequently, good names appear on envelopes, on diplomas, in the telephone directories, and in all other public places. For this reason, letters from Ashima's mother say Ashima on the outside, Monu on the inside. Good names tend to represent dignified and enlightened qualities. Ashima means she who is limitless, without borders. Ashok, the name of an emperor, means he who transcends grief. Pet names have no such aspirations. Pet names are never recorded officially, only uttered and remembered. Unlike good names, pet names are frequently meaningless, deliberately silly, ironic, or often onomatopoetic. Often in one's infancy, one answers unwittingly to dozens of pet names until one eventually sticks. And so at one point, when the baby screws up his rosy, wrinkled face and regards his small circle of admirers, Mr. Nandi leans over and calls the baby Buro, the Bengali word for old man. What's his name, Buro? Patty inquires brightly, bearing another tray of baked chicken for Ashima. Ashok lifts the lid and polishes off the chicken. Ashima is now officially referred to by the maternity nurses as the Jello and ice cream lady. No, no, that is not a name, Ashima explains. We haven't chosen. My grandmother is choosing. Patty nods. Will she be here soon? Ashima laughs. Her first genuine laugh after giving birth. The thought of her grandmother, born in the previous century, a shrunken woman in widow's white and with tawny skin that refuses to wrinkle, boarding a plane and flying to Cambridge, is inconceivable to her. A thought that, no matter how welcome, how desirable, feels entirely impossible, absurd. No, but a letter will. That evening, Ashok goes home to the apartment, checks for the letter. 3 days come and go. Ashima is shown by the nursing staff how to change diapers and how to clean the umbilical stub. She is given hot salt water baths to soothe her bruises and stitches. She is given a list of pediatricians and countless brochures on breastfeeding and bonding and immunizing and samples of blood shampoos and Q-tips and creams. The fourth day there is good news and bad news. The good news is that Ashima and the baby are to be discharged the following morning. The bad news is that they are told by Mr. Wilcox, compiler of hospital birth certificates, that they must choose a name for their son. For they learn that in America, a baby cannot be released from the hospital without a birth certificate, and that a birth certificate needs a name. But sir, Ashima protests, we can't possibly name him ourselves. Mr. Wilcox, slight, bald, unamused, glances at the couple, both visibly distressed, then glances at the nameless child. I see, he says. The reason being? We are waiting for a letter, Ashok says, explaining the situation in detail. I see, Mr. Wilcox says again. That is unfortunate. I'm afraid your only alternative is to have the certificate read Baby Boy Ganguly. You will, of course, be required to amend the permanent record when a name is decided upon. Ashima looks at Ashok expectantly. Is that what we should do? I don't recommend it, Mr. Wilcox says. You will have to appear before a judge, pay a fee. The red tape is endless. Oh dear, Ashok says. Mr. Wilcox nods, and silence ensues. Don't you have any backups? He asks. Ashima frowns. What does it mean, backup? Well, something in reserve in case you didn't like what your grandmother has chosen. Ashima and Ashok shake their heads. It has never occurred to either of them to question Ashima's grandmother's selection, to disregard an elder's wishes in such a way. You can always name him after yourself, or one of your ancestors, Mr. Wilcox suggests, admitting that he is actually Howard Wilcox III. It's a fine tradition. The kings of France and England did it, he adds. But this isn't possible, Ashima and Ashok think to themselves. This tradition doesn't exist for Bengalis. Naming a son after father or grandfather, a daughter after mother or grandmother. This sign of respect in America and Europe, this symbol of heritage and lineage, would be ridiculed in India. Within Bengali families, individual names are sacred, inviolable. They are not meant to be inherited or shared. Then what about naming him after another person, someone you greatly admire? Mr. Wilcox says, his eyebrows raised. Hopefully, he sighs. Think about it. I'll be back in a few hours, he tells them, exiting the room. The door shuts, which is when, with a slight quiver of recognition, as if he had known it all along, the perfect pet name for his son occurs to Ashok. He remembers the page crumpled tightly in his fingers, the sudden shock of the lantern's glare in his eyes. But for the first time he thinks of that moment not with terror, but with gratitude. "Hello, Gogol," he whispers, leaning over his son's haughty face, his tightly bundled body. "Gogol," he repeats, satisfied. The baby turns his head with an expression of extreme consternation and yawns. Ashima approves, aware that the name stands not only for her son's life but her husband's. She knows the story of the accident, a story she heard with polite newlywed sympathy, but the thought of which now especially, makes her blood go cold. There are nights when she is woken by her husband's muffled screams, times they have ridden the subway together and the rhythm of the wheels on the tracks makes him suddenly pensive, aloof. She has never read any Gogol herself, but she is willing to place him on a shelf in her mind, along with Tennyson and Wordsworth. Besides, it's only a pet name, not to be taken seriously, simply something to put on the certificate for now to release them from the hospital. When Mr. Wilcox returns with his typewriter, Ashok spells out the name. Thus, Gogol Ganguly is registered in the hospital's files. "Goodbye, Gogol," Patty says, planting a quiet kiss on his shoulder. And to Ashima, dressed once again in her wrinkled silk sari, "Good luck." A first photograph, somewhat overexposed, is taken by Dr. Gupta. That broiling hot, late summer's day, Gogol, an indistinct blanketed mass, reposing in his weary mother's arms. She stands on the steps of the hospital, staring at the camera, her eyes squinting into the sun. Her husband looks on from one side, his wife's suitcase in his hand, smiling with his head lowered. Gogol enters the world. His father will eventually write on the back in Bengali letters.